When you start to think about that, 25% of adults that have disabilities control about $8 trillion in disposable income globally. When you're not fixing this stuff, you're leaving money on the table as an e-com brand.
You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-com strategy, technology and CX-focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and re-platform specialists James Gedd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-com strategy of leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This episode is sponsored by Shopify. Got another really important topic today. I love it when we get subject matter experts on the pod. So we're talking about understanding web accessibility for e-com in 2025, ensuring compliance, what do you focus on, what are the impacts of doing this properly. I was just having a chat with our guest I'll introduce properly in a minute. Prior to recording this, and Bet said something really spot on, which is this isn't just about compliance. You fix accessibility and you improve the UX for all users, and you can model an ROI on that. So we will be coming to how you do model ROI. But first, let me give a warm welcome to Bet Hannon, who's a web accessibility and e-com expert, also the CEO at AccessiCart. Hey, Bet, welcome to the pod.
Hey, James, welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, I really appreciate it because it was you who very kindly initiated the conversation a while back through LinkedIn. And it's an area at the time I said, well, do you know what? We'll come to that when the time is right. And I'm really happy that we've now had the opportunity. And I believe you're joining us from an equally cold place. You're over in the US, right?
I am. I'm in the Pacific Northwest. It's pretty chilly, below freezing this morning. So nice fall day.
Yes. Well, I'm a few hours ahead of you in the day. So I'm about 2 degrees above freezing. So I'm going to gloat on the relative warmth that I have.
There you go. Go for it.
So look, before you start getting into all of the good practice and the juicy stuff around accessibility, let's start with introduction. So for those who haven't come across AccessiCart and you and what you do want to give people a bit of a flavour who you are and what AccessiCart is?
Yeah, so web accessibility is about helping people, making sure you're letting people with disabilities use your site just like everybody else. I run AccessiCart for the last, before that we were more of a general web dev firm. We did a lot of stuff with e-com. And then about 10 years ago, we had a client that needed web accessibility. We dived in, and it was kind of this light bulb moment for us where all of us on the team realized there were people in our lives that we knew, that we cared about, that needed accessibility in some way or a fashion. And it became just sort of this passion for us. And so now we are a services company that focuses on testing. Now, people test for accessibility, both automated testing and manual testing. We do some testing with users who have disabilities. And then we're doing support and consultation about how to fix, and then reporting. And in many ways, the reporting itself is the biggest kind of legal leverage that brands will have. So providing that whole spectrum of support around accessibility.
Yeah, I think it's when I have conversations, and I'm not in the detail like you are, when I have conversations with people and talk to them about accessibility, the thing that startles me is how few people understand the size of the population that are impacted by accessible need. Because I think a lot of people think, this is about people with blindness and visual impairment. It's like, okay, that's one element. And actually, in a lot of Western countries, that proportion of the population has grown as well. But then you talk about those who might have a physical disability that impacts uses of laptops, keyboards, and where they need additional support. Yep. It's amazing, actually, how many...
Yeah, so across most of the developed world, the estimate is around 25% of all adults need some accommodation, whether they have a permanent disability or sometimes a temporary one, right? I may break my hand and I can't use a mouse for a while, right? So there's some of that. But it does go much broader. I'm doing some research just yesterday, actually, for thinking about, what percentage of some of these different kind of accessibility fixes, what percentage of your customers are you blocking when you don't fix them? And I'm thinking about when you fix color contrast, for example, that's where you have the color of the font and the difference between that and the background that it sits against. That impacts people who are low vision, who might be, for instance, legally blind, but still have some vision, but they need a good color contrast. It impacts people who are colorblind. That's about 9% of all men. And then it impacts people who are over 50 who don't think about themselves as, like me, who don't think of themselves as disabled, but the lens of the eye starts to yellow with age, and that impacts color perception. So you'll find it a lot harder to start seeing those color contrast things. And then it also begins to impact folks, so people over 50. So when you start to look at all of those people all together, that's somewhere between 35 and 45% of all adults. And so it's like, if you're not paying attention to that, those kinds of accessibility issues, I mean, it's really a wide swath of people. So, yeah, I think, you were right. We talked about, and I try to stress a lot, when you fix accessibility issues, yeah, the people with sort of legally defined disabilities will have an improved experience, but you're improving that user experience for everybody. And that translates to conversions and ROI.
Yeah, and I can attest this as I'm 49, 50 in April. I'm long-sighted, but my sight's got worse. I have elements of colour blindness. Light reds and greens, nightmare for me. And my daughter laughs at me. She says, "What do you mean that is not green?"
Yes, my brother's colorblind too.
And I have the contrast bit I see all the time where somebody has put like white copy on a background, and it's really hard for me to read without focusing, and I just will give up half the time.
Yep, exactly. That's it. People will just give up and move on. And so, when you start to think about that, 25% of adults that have those disabilities control about $8 trillion in disposable income globally. And so when you're not fixing this stuff, you're leaving money on the table as an e-com brand. So really, it's about, are you, there's some great, you're getting that better conversions, you're getting, better SEO, both traditional SEO and AI SEO. You're getting brand, you're positioning your brand as being more inclusive and welcoming of folks. There's just a lot of great benefits to it beyond just a technical compliance.
Excellent. For those of you listening, we're going to get into accountability for this in businesses, calculating ROI, state of legislation in the US, UK, EU, steps people can take, some examples, etc. So there's a lot of really practical stuff in this.
Yep.
So let's get going. The first bit I wanted to get into is accountability and the issues you see, because we were talking about this earlier. I often see this as quite fragmented, where there isn't a single person accountable, even though multiple teams need to execute to make site accessible, which is one of the key points you were making to me before we recorded. But what do you see? What are the issues you tend to find in terms of like accountability and ownership? And what is the impact when that accountability is spread across a business?
Yeah. So, making a site accessible in terms of a sustainable practice within a brand has to come, as you said, from multiple teams, right? So you have some things that are developer related, some things that are design related, and then a lot that's content related as people are putting content into sites. And so one of the problems is that no one person or no one team has some accountability for that. We see a lot of times when, in the US, when we have e-com brands reaching out to us because they've been sued, it's a director of marketing that's reaching out to me. But, they often, when I approach directors of marketing who are not being sued, they think of accessibility as that's a legal thing. That's somebody else's problem because that's a compliance issue. And I don't have to deal with that. And so, yeah, I think it's problematic, and people tend to bury their heads in the sand until they get sued or there's a complaint filed, and then they are scrambling.
What do Mattel, Victoria Beckham, Sennheiser, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet. It also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. Shopify, powering the future of enterprise commerce. Find out more at shopify.com/enterprise.
Yeah, I think this is such a spot on point, is that if you only see accessibility as compliance, you put the wrong people, and that's not detrimental to the people who've got an eye on compliance, because that's absolutely critical and you fundamentally.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
But yeah, the impact is far wider, and I hope that one of the key things I want people to take away who might not understand accessibility in detail, because it's not in their day-to-day job, is just that this has a fundamental impact on your ability to trade online as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So that dovetails nicely into that. You've built an ROI calculator, and this is a question I get all the time when people, for example, if I'm having a conversation with someone about what the benefits are of ensuring you're in the UK, WCAG2, AA compliant. Are there benefits to going to AAA on some elements outside public sector? It's not a legal requirement, but there are some advantages depending on your audience. But then the classic thing will be, what's the ROI? Why should I spend on that? I could put money in paid media. So how does your calculator work? How does it factor in variances? Because not all businesses are at the same stage of accessibility.
Right. So there's not a lot of great research out there about this. There are a few studies that are like Tesco in the UK actually did, that study is nearly 15 years old at this point, but they did a massive overhaul of their accessibility and their ROI improved 37%. Well, part of that is the time when they were doing that, and people are more using online ordering. People are ordering groceries, so they're ordering every week, right? So some of those factors that were made that kind of a unicorn sort of, result. Typically, we might see somewhere between, I would say, between 0.5% and up to 3, 4, 5%. And some of the factors are, how bad is the accessibility at the beginning before you start your remediation work? So, for example, if you have problems with the checkout and no person who's blind can ever check out on your website, that's pretty serious. Versus, do you have kind of the color contrast you were describing where it's a friction point? It's like people are giving up, but some people persevere, right? That's a less of a lift, right? If you're still getting some lift, but it's not the same amount of lift as if you're like totally opening up the checkout. So there's a factor in how bad are your was your accessibility, is your current accessibility, then how much you're going to invest in it. You don't have to, this is the thing, right? You don't have to fix everything all at once. It's almost always anyway, a process, right? You're moving toward it. It would be great if people could move faster, but most of the time it's a process. How much are you investing? And then also a factor is, what's your revenue level? What's the traffic? How much are you actually doing business? A 1% improvement for somebody who's doing $1 million a year is different than a company that's doing $100 million a year. So the investment, is a bigger chunk, it's a percentage of your revenue, right? And so, I would say if folks are investing 1% or even 0.5% of their annual revenue and accessibility to begin with, that there can be some great things. But for a company that's making, $5 million dollars or pounds a year in revenue, or not, I don't know the pound exchange anymore. That all kind of went crazy for a while. But a $5 million US dollar revenue, they can see an ROI on their investment in accessibility within a matter of months. I mean, it does not take a long time to start seeing an ROI. And so why it's one of the few compliances that can pay for itself, right? And so I don't know why people don't, and I think there are people who are starting to jump on this as kind of, as companies are wanting to make those incremental improvements that kind of drive ROI.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then, so very, very closely linked to the point of ROI is the cost element of not doing this right. And let's get into the legislation, because I think the impact of lawsuits in the US under ADA, the Discrimination Act in the US, feel more high profile than what's coming in the EU and into UK. And I know that we're starting to see some legal action. So let's split the two. So do you want to talk to us about the current state of legislation in the US and what are the implications, what's been happening?
Yeah. So ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, was passed in 1990, before we really had commercial websites like we have today. So that law itself doesn't really have anything in it about web or digital accessibility. There have been a few lawsuits around government websites and pieces around public services, things like banks and utilities, that have been pretty clearly kind of moving us toward applying ADA to private business websites. But in the U.S., it is almost exclusively driven by what we call serial plaintiff lawsuits. And so that's one attorney and one plaintiff, typically a blind plaintiff, who might sue dozens and dozens of companies together with a kind of cookie cutter lawsuit. Sometimes they will get what's called a demand letter, and that's just a letter that comes in the mail to the business owner or the business, and it says, we intend to sue you because you have left alt text off of your images. And it will be very vague. It won't be a specific page. It'll just be very vague because they're sending that same letter to dozens of people. And so it can look spammy or scammy, and people sometimes throw it away. If you get the letter, that's the best way to, you want to try. Almost 99% of these cases end in a settlement. Almost some of them do go to court because the next step in those ambulance chasing kind of attorneys is kind of to drive it to court and then get a settlement out of that. And so you can, the cost for those suits ranges, you pay the settlement of like a fee to the attorney and the plaintiff. By the way, the plaintiffs actually don't get a lot of money. The blind person doesn't get a lot of money because if they have some kind of disability benefits, they can't get a lot of money they lose those benefits, and that's a bigger deal to them. And so they don't actually get a lot of money. It's the attorneys making and driving a lot of this. So they will, the person, the attorney and their person, they get a settlement. There's a settlement money. Then there's also the attorney's fees, and the brand pays both sides of that. And so the total cost for that probably ranges somewhere between $10,000 to $50,000 or more. And then you still theoretically have to make the website conform to WCAG at this moment, most of the court cases are coming out to 2.1 AA. And you get within a year or two, maybe you get 24 months. So you get that kind of lawsuit thing, and it's kind of a scammy shakedown kind of thing. On the other hand, that law is how we've gotten some really good benefits for people with disabilities, right? So it's both sides of that coin. Being able to file those lawsuits is why there is Braille on ATMs in the US, right? And so it's both sides of that. But that's how it happens, is that's kind of those kind of scammy lawsuits that people are driven by. And people can get sued more than once. About 80% of those lawsuits are e-commerce sites, because you think about the total, the user engagement, what a user, there's a lot of places for problems and friction, accessibility issues on an e-commerce interaction. So about 25% of them are running overlays already, accessibility overlays. And about 25% of them have been sued before. So sometimes it's 2 or 3 times before that they're sued before they say, hey, maybe we should just buckle down and make the site accessible. And so that's when we hear from people a lot of times, is when they're doing that.
And how do you see it different in the EU approach to enforcing compliance? Are you seeing many high-profile cases coming?
Yeah.
In urgency?
So there is, we've been kind of waiting to see. So in the EU, the European Accessibility Act was passed 6 years ago, and we had until, businesses had until June 28, 2025, so last June, that's when enforcement started. So enforcement was going to start then. And so we kind of expected, like with GDPR, everyone would wait till the last minute and then start scrambling. Nobody really started scrambling. And then the enforcement, under the EU, there's the directive that's the Accessibility Act, and every nation under that transposes into their own national laws. And so it's kind of frustrating, because the intent of the Accessibility Act was to kind of give more standardization. But what it did is created all these individual national laws that are a little different. They have different fine levels and different structures a little bit differently. So we're just starting to see some of that enforcement start to kick out. So there are, one of the things that the EAA does is gives advocacy groups on behalf of people with disabilities the standing to file complaints, as well as individual customers. So an individual customer can come to the business and say, I can't check out on your site. But the advocacy group can do that on behalf of people with disabilities as well. And so we saw at in July, there was a group of two advocacy groups in France for the visually impaired, and a pro bono legal group that very publicly made those complaints. Now, they didn't have to. They filed their complaints with the businesses for grocery store chains in France and their apps and websites, but they also released a press release. And so that's the kind of piece that we're kind of starting to see, is there can be big reputational kinds of hits because now these advocacy groups have a lot of motivation to kind of make those things public. So the 4 grocery store chains, they were notified in July. They gave them until like September 1. They would pursue legal action. They actually didn't pursue the legal action until just a couple of weeks ago. So now there's been a legal case filed with the summary to like tell these people, these grocery store chains, to start following the law. And we don't know how that's going to go. But there, you get that kind of public, shaming, I guess, in a way, right? So that's one front. Another front is that in the last few weeks, so every country has it gets translated in English as the Market Surveillance Authority, which sounds to U.S. ears like surveillance, sounds really dodgy and kind of, spy like, but it's really their authority, their accountability group. The Swedish oversight agency announced that they were going to start doing proactive auditing of large e-com retailers in Sweden. They would be looking at websites only, not apps. They would be looking at the homepage, a product page, and the search pages, functions. And so it's kind of fairly limited, but still, out there, but they're proactively starting. So some of these oversight bodies will start to proactively audit things. And then finally, we learned that the Netherlands has put out a piece about reporting. And I was kind of surprised by that. And so I read more about it, about self-reporting. If you have issues still on your website, if you have accessibility issues and you've identified them through some kind of testing, you are required to report that to their oversight authority. And I thought, wow, on a special form. And not only to report it once, but to report it, if you get a test and you learn about an issue or a consumer reports an issue, if it's under kind of the standard auditing practices, we grade the severity of an issue. Like, there's critical, severe, moderate, minor. If it's a critical or severe issue, you have to report it within a week. If it's a moderate or minor, you have 30 days. I thought that was in some ways ingenious because it motivates those teams if you fix the issue within that amount of time, you don't have to report it. If you find a critical issue, you fix it within a week, you don't have to report it. So that's like the motivation for actually just fixing things quick instead of getting a big backlog of pieces. But what I later discovered was that obligation to self-report any issues that are remaining on your site is actually a part of the EAA directive. And so we expect that more nations will kind of come back and fix their national legislation that didn't put that in. We know that there is an obligation to self-report in Germany and in Spain as well. It's not as clear. There's not a special form for doing that so far, but we expect that will come back. And so I was kind of surprised by that in just the last few weeks about how that's unfolding. So many different kinds of levels of, wow, they're taking this seriously. This has some teeth. People really are going to have to start getting, proactive about dealing with these kind of their compliance on that.
That's really interesting. I hadn't understood that part of the EA requirement framework of the self-reporting piece. And I imagine there'll be some out there listen who understand it and others who don't and realise that there's a process that has to be put in place. And this is one of the reasons of having a conversation like this, is to help people understand what processes and documentation they need to prioritise.
Yeah. And it's not only that, when you say processes, there's a lot of other kinds of things. So for instance, in in some, and the countries are a little different now, but like when a consumer makes a complaint to the business, like your accessibility statement needs to tell people where they should make a complaint, how they can file a complaint. So email this or call us or you can contact us in these ways. When a complaint comes in, then some countries give you a week to reply, that initiate a reply back. Others give 30 days. In France, it's supposed to be fixed within 30 days, right? And so there's some deadlines for fixing things. So you need to think ahead about when a complaint comes in. And it's not if, it's when, because no website is 100% accessible, right? Somebody's going to find an error at some point. So plan ahead, like what's that process going to be? So you're not wasting time trying to figure out your process when you have this very narrow window for making the complaint. Because if you don't satisfy or fix that complaint, then the next step is that person can escalate their complaint to the oversight body. And that's what you want to avoid in all of that. But all of that piece, what you did, the complaint that came in, all of that has to be preserved for documentation. You have to document that the complaint came in. You have to document what response was going out to that consumer, what happened internally, where it's been logged, who fixed it, how did it go, what's the testing, did the consumer verify that it was fixed? All of that documentation piece has to now be, you have to maintain that documentation as a part of processes going forward.
Yeah, and this is where I think a lot of businesses have gaps, is they don't have a process for this. They will have, as part of maybe their ongoing website optimization, they'll have streams of looking at fixing the accessibility issues where an audit tool has said you're missing alt tags or you put the wrong arrays in and you'll fix it. But there isn't that formal, I guess, legal process of, if there is an issue, we've got to make sure that if we're then audited, we can demonstrate action.
Well, and you need to train your support people so that, if the complaint about accessibility comes in through a support channel, the support people know what to do with it so that it gets handled properly and legally for going forward, right?
Yeah, that is a great point. Now let's come on to some of the specific issues that because obviously you're working with lots of different businesses, you'll see all sorts of things. I want to just highlight a few to people listening of the sort of things that you've found that cause an issue for somebody with an accessibility challenge. So, for example, you'd mentioned to me when we were planning this episode about keyboard navigation being broken for choosing product variants. So the product with the variant couldn't actually be added to the cart. Now, if you're UAT testing a site as somebody without any accessibility issues, you'll just go through as normal, bang, click it. Oh, everything's working. Great. My site's good. I've passed that test. So can you explain a few and what the impacts are?
Yeah. So I think it's important to note for folks as you're testing that there's automated testing that you can leverage that will help you identify issues. And you should absolutely leverage automated testing. It will help you find things like color contrast and heading structure, heading structures that are not properly semantically nested. It'll help you find images that may be missing alt text. And then, it may help you identify places where you have ambiguous link text or link text that's the same in various places. It's important to note that automated testing will only help you find about 30% of issues. So you still have to do manual testing. Things like keyboard navigation, things like looking at the alt. Just because alt text there is alt text doesn't necessarily mean that it's valid alt text, right? So sometimes people have put the product name or title instead of actual alt text in an image, or they've put, we even see things like, JPEG 6932, right? Or whatever as the alt text. And so, those kinds of things, it won't, automated testing won't help you find. But, we see a lot of problems with keyboard navigation. Things like you mentioned where you can't select a variant. You can't, we audited a site one time where, you could get a product, you could get through keyboard navigation, you could get the product in the cart, you could get there, you could fill out, except you could not tab out of the last field to click the submit button. So you could never pay for the product to complete the thing. And that is resulting then, of course, in abandoned carts and, right, you're getting, so it's those kind of pieces of, you got to test that whole process of the search, making sure your search works, getting through there, putting things in the cart, reading through the products, all of that. It's a piece. So we see stuff like that. We see a lot, actually for e-commerce, a lot of times what happens is we see problems with add-ons and plugins and, apps that are being added to the platform. So there's, problems with, that will, not announced to screen readers properly, depending on what they are, aren't keyboard navigatable, whatever, or mess up the heading structure in terms of where they're placed on the page. So all kinds of things that apps may do. So, and as the brand owner, the brand is responsible for any third party things they put on their site. So you might think that, that's the problem for those, the developer or the third party platform over there, but it's actually your liability as the brand owner to make sure that everything's working on your site. And, I think that's the other piece is getting, making sure when you're vetting those kinds of solutions for adding features to the site that you're looking at accessibility as one of the things that, you're testing when you're looking at items.
Yeah, some great examples. And it's reinforced to me, actually, just the importance of having this conversation up front in projects about what testing is going to be done and who's doing which, because developers who are building, say, to a AA standard site will do their code testing. But you're right, it's the wider testing of what about the app? What does that do to user journey? What does that do to page templates? So the core code could be accessible, and then you've introduced something which creates a barrier to that user journey. So it's a really good point to tease out.
It happens really frequently, and when that happens, you want to have you need to push back with those app, the app that you've bought from that vendor, and they if they're smart, they're realizing that you've just saved them thousands of dollars of testing and identified an accessibility issue for them, right? If they're not, they get defensive and they just say, we're never going to fix that. So then you have to figure out, what risk you want to take, or maybe you move on to somebody else. You find a substitute that is accessible. But a lot of times people are very, very eager to fix things. They can be, and so they just haven't known before that they needed to fix it. And so that can be a piece of what we do. And we do some consulting with some of those kinds of companies too, and helping them fix things.
From my experience of working with a wide range of development agencies, is there are a lot who want to knock. There are not a lot. Sorry, there are some who just want to knock the project out, and they have their way of working, and they're very intransigent with it. But there are so many good agencies who want to deliver good projects and who care about their work and are trying to constantly upskill, because it's constantly changing. Browsers are changing, platforms are changing, standards are changing, compliance is changing. And it's actually really hard for them to keep up with everything, because they're trying to do code, full stack coding. They're not an accessibility expert. And actually having an accessibility representative to guide and point out to them how their code could get tighter.
Yeah, and that's some of the most fun work that we do is when we don't do it as much as I kind of had hoped. Maybe we might. And that is to come alongside as kind of an accessibility subject matter expert, along with development teams. And so they would bring us in as a part of the project. We would kind of have some predictable touch points with them, like at that beginning conversation about what are the features, what are the apps, what are the add-ons that we're going to use. Let's vet, so we can help them understand, well, there's some kind of predictable things in this particular feature. You're going to need a date picker, and date pickers often have accessibility problems. So let's be conscious of that, right? We give them some advice. We can give advice in the design phase around the design, look at the mockups, and we can tell you where there's going to be some problems. And then as the build out is happening at the end, and we can kind of do some auditing as they're moving through that. what we found was that as teams did that 2 or 3 times with us, those developers leveled up their accessibility skills. And that was great. It was fun to see them kind of growing, and we love teaching in that way. And so that was kind of a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, do you know what? It's just triggered me on the current project I'm working on, actually, because it's even small elements like a client who's got a countdown timer on the PDP for next day delivery cut off.
Yep.
And stopping and thinking about, well, actually, that's not a static text. That's a simple, like readable div. It's a dynamic piece of content.
Yep.
How is that accessible, actually? Or is it rendered in a way that's unreadable by like a screen reader, for example?
You're going to have to test it with a screen reader, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's just made me realize that there's additional things that I've not thought of before, which is why I love speaking to experts. It's always opened my eyes to new things. But so let's come on to the manual testing, and we'll talk about free tools to do an automated test in a bit. And I think a lot of people are more used to, okay, well, I'll use a tool and I'll do a test, I'll get a report, and I'll know that, I've missed some alt tags, or, as you said, I'll issue a certain div classes, etc. Great. Okay, I can work the deads. But you said before, and I've seen this stat in many places about that automated can only find a small percentage. I think you said about 30%. I've seen 30 to 35 somewhere else.
Yeah.
How does manual testing differ? What values are adding? What can manual testing find that automated can't?
Well, because you just kind of talked about a great example, right? You've got that I'm assuming JavaScript driven countdown timer, right? And so we have to go in, the automated testing can't get in to see what's happening there. So you're going to have to just use a screen reader. You're going to have to actually get in and turn on a screen reader and see what it reads out for you. You have to kind of begin to get some comfort level with some of those tools. And I think, it's kind of critical if developers are going to do, build accessible things, then you need to get some comfort with keyboard navigation and using a screen reader. And there are some online courses that you can take to kind of learn those skills. It's not, rocket science to do it. Now you're never going to be as, I would never claim to be proficient with screen readers or keyboard navigation as people who depend on them every day, right? But the basics, you're going to be able to, learn, to identify sort of the basic problems. And so I think that's, just critical basic work, to putting out accessible code, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's I always find that as well. When it's seen as a cost, people aren't thinking about the benefit, and costs get cut. Whereas if you see ROI, you invest to achieve ROI. And I think trying to get people to understand that spending money up front saves a lot more and has a stronger ROI than trying to retrospectively fix.
Well, I'm kind of coming around to, there's an expense, but the other side of that is what percentage of your site visitors are you comfortable turning away?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not, maybe you're never going to get to 100%, of everybody can do everything on your site. Maybe, but are you comfortable turning away 5%, 10%, 30% of your users? Making sure that people can use, and that's sort of a broader, in many ways, accessibility is a form of user experience, right? It's taking user personas that have people with disabilities into account, but it's a form of UX. And if you're not paying attention to user experience, customer journey, you're not gonna, it doesn't turn out well for you, right?
Yes.
You're losing money. You're leaving money on the table when you don't pay attention to those things more broadly, but especially also including accessibility.
Yeah. And I think apart from companies that are very compliance obsessed and, concerned about legal cases where actually that's the driving force, then fundamentally every other business is about. I
think there are a lot of companies that really don't care about legal compliance until they get sued. They think of it as a really small risk. They don't, and then it takes off like fire. Like it's like, once somebody in their in their kind of niche gets sued, then more people are paying attention to that. For a while it was home decor, right? And home decor people were, and now it's more apparel. More apparel sites are getting sued. And then people start paying attention to that. But I think in many ways, you're right. They don't think about it. And that's why I've tried to shift I want people to think about it not as avoiding legal action only, but it is that, and that's what motivates people. But I want it to be more than fear that motivates people. I want it to be like, you are leaving money on the table. I can help you, claim some of that money that you're, and especially if you're first in your niches to be doing that, right? Your competitors, that you can be making more money than your less accessible competitors.
Yes. And that's a nice way of framing it. And let's, as a final question, let's come on to tooling. I know we talked about the services you provide, the value of the human element on top of the tools, but there will be people who initially their starting point will want to be, right, I want to just run a quick audit and see what my site looks like overall. Choosing a tool is really, really important, because you could get something that's going to give you some information that's not practical or might not be reliable. So what free tools do you use? Do you rate? Do you recommend to help people, I guess, get a starting point of knowledge? And then when somebody's at a more mature stage, what are the paid options that you rate?
Right. So I think if you're just starting out and you have never, ever thought about accessibility, a good place that's fairly easy to start getting a sense for how bad things are or what you might need to fix is the wave.webaim.org tool. And it is a free tool that will do an automated scan of your site and just give you a feed out of the numbers of issues for a single page of your site. So run your homepage, run a couple of product pages. It will only provide those automated things. So it's going to give you total errors, and then it'll give you, in addition to that, contrast errors, color contrast errors. Do be aware that when you look at that, automated tools have limitations, right? There can be false positives and false negatives, but there are a lot of false positives for color contrast when there's text on top of a background image, because of course the automated tool can't see the background image. They only see, so when you look at the color contrast test and it says white text on white background, that's a color contrast violation. It's not really, because there's an image there that's providing the contrast. So you have to kind of be thoughtful about it, but that can give you a good sense and kind of begin to help you to focus on that. But that's a free tool. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. There's a browser extension I use all the time. There are axe tools in the Chrome inspector that you can use that kind of similar. I think those are harder for non-developers to use. But if you're a brand owner, do that. But the axe tools are probably the next best free level of those. And there's some other plugins and extensions for browsers that can help you look at reading order, things like that in the browser window as you're testing. So those are kind of free tools. I don't think it's super helpful to start. You can start doing regular automated scans of all the pages of your site. And that will help you find the places on all the pages where you need to start fixing color contrast and things like heading structures that are out of place, alt text that's missing, all of those kinds of pieces. Just understand that if you start using those tools and fixing those, that's only going to get you a certain part of the journey there. And it may not even be the really blocking pieces. So you may, it's certainly a good, getting started on those things is a good thing. For those I use, we've worked with Site Improve is one. They're not very transparent about their pricing on the thing. And but I also really like AAA Aardvark, so Aardvark Accessibility, and they're much more transparent about their pricing. And I really like the tool is good for people who both developers. There's a lot of information for developers, but also non-developers for giving reports, but also kind of understanding issues and finding information about that. So those are the two kind of paid tools that I like for that. But just understand that at some point, even if you're just using those pieces and moving along, you're probably going to want to have some kind of help from an accessibility professional in terms of some testing and or guidance around the remediation. It's important to look carefully at that. It's kind of like the early days of SEO. Everybody's hanging out their accessibility shingle, especially in the EU now with all of the stuff coming up. A lot of people kind of piling on. So you'll want to look for folks, a good thing to do in terms of asking folks, interviewing folks, is to ask, do they do manual testing? Because some people are only depending on automated testing, do they do automated testing? Do they test with screen readers? Do they can they help you find testing with people who actually have disabilities? So that's, you can begin to kind of, be a little wary of folks asking those questions. You can look for a certification from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, IAAP. The basic credential is what we call CPAC, Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. That can be an indicator, having that kind of, a credential. But just know that there wasn't a big push to get credentials for a long time in accessibility work, because it really didn't matter in some ways until the EU Accessibility Act now talks about, professionals. And so more people are getting that credential, but there's only about 3,500 of us in the whole world that have that credential right now. And so, it's growing, and there's certainly a widespread interest in folks getting that credential. But, it can be an indicator, but also there are people who are very experienced accessibility professionals who don't have that credential. So just asking about them, get a sample report, see, talk to folks. Do they talk real human language, or do they, are they understandable and supportive and help you learn? Or are they, not helpful, right? In that way.
I've really enjoyed this, and I love talking about accessibility. I must be one of those strange people who really enjoys geeking out on ecom, but it's so important. It really is important, and it's going to be increased. If you look at the trends of the and definitions of accessibility and where like population challenges are going with things like vision, etc., the numbers are going up. They're not going down. Especially people are generally living a lot longer, and therefore the amount of time that people are living with these challenges is increasing. So you're right.
Well, and generationally we're shifting, right? So people, especially the pandemic, accelerated this, but all, people who were in their 80s and 90s before were not really online in the way that now incoming 80 and 90-year-olds have been, right? And so we have more increased use of the web, but it's really about, if you are lucky enough to not die suddenly, you will acquire a disability and need this. So there's some maybe you should think about the experience you want for yourself in the future, your future self, or your future, spouse or children, what you would like for them in terms of accessibility, because we all will have a disability at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of framing it. And it's not ended on negative, ended on a practicality that actually this, coming back to your earlier point, this is fundamentally about protecting your business and opening it up to the widest possible audience and giving people a decent experience so that they feel valued and they want to come back and shop with you, not somebody else. So, Bet, I've loved it. Thank you for reaching out and setting this up. But if somebody's interested, if they want to learn more, they've got a specific challenge, or they want to know more about how you deliver that kind of human expertise, how do they connect?
The best place is our website, AccessiCart.com. And you can reach out to me there or via LinkedIn, Bet Hannon.
Excellent. And the links will be on our landing page on our website. So if you do want to find details of the website or Bet's LinkedIn profile, just go and have a look at the landing page. Bet, thanks so much. And look, I wish you a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Great to chat with you.
Yeah, and you. And thanks everyone as listeners. As always, keep your ears peeled for next week.
You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-com strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.